We are, as President Biden has said, as I have said, as others have said, and to borrow a phrase from the European Union itself, looking to de-risk, not decouple from China.
Whether they aim to sever connections or reduce risks associated with China, the attempts by the United States and the European Union to distance themselves from China are unlikely to succeed. In this video, we will discuss why decoupling or de-risking is not going to work. In the beginning, when Donald Trump was the US president, he started a trade war with China by adding extra taxes on things coming from China. This made everyone start talking about decoupling. But when President Joe Biden took over, they realized that China and the US were in a tough relationship in terms of money, politics, and ideas. Yet, they also depend on each other for things like business, dealing with climate change, public health, nuclear safety, and more. So, they don't want to completely cut off ties with China. Instead, they want to lower the risks when dealing with China. This was when the West said they didn't want to decouple from China, but they wanted to de-risk from China. But it's important to understand that going from decoupling to de-risking is pretty much like playing with words. It won't change the attitude of some countries that try to avoid facing reality. So, what does de-risking from China really mean? If we look at what some Western countries are saying, it's a combination of two things. First, they want to rely less on China when it comes to money and business. They want more variety in their financial dealings. Second, they want to reduce certain money and business activities with China to weaken China's abilities in high-tech and national security. The truth is that de-risking is really about de-China or even undoing globalization. China is the world's second largest economy and does a lot of business with over 120 countries and regions. If countries start de-risking from China, it will not only mess up how the global market works but also create chaos in the global economic system. It will make the rules for how the world does business confusing, and in the end, it will really hurt economic globalization. Now, let's look at the data on whether decoupling or de-risking from China is an effective strategy. First, the process of decoupling between the United States and China has been underway, as China's portion of U.S. imports began to decrease in 2018. China's share in U.S. imports went from 21.6% in 2017 to 16.3% in 2022, essentially returning to the 2007 levels, which was before the global financial crisis. Second, the decline in China's share of U.S. imports primarily affected goods that were subject to tariffs. In 2022, U.S. imports from China in tariff goods were 12.5% lower than they were in 2017, while imports from other parts of the world increased for those same products. This substantial drop in China's share of tariff goods and the overall increase in U.S. imports suggest that tariffs encouraged importers to look for new sources of supply. Third, certain countries have notably taken China's place in the U.S. market. The data shows clear evidence of the shifting of the top U.S. trade partners from 2017 to 2022. Looking at the overall shares, the countries that gained the most market share were Vietnam, 1.9 percentage points, Taiwan, 1 percentage point, Canada, 0.75 percentage points, Mexico, 0.64 percentage points, India, 0.57 percentage points, and Korea, 0.53 percentage points. These 6 countries account for more than China's 5.3 percentage point decline. In the case of strategic goods, Vietnam and Taiwan seem to have gained the most market share in the U.S. over this period. Lastly, and perhaps most importantly, countries that increased their exports to the U.S. also enhanced their connections with China. While other exporters are replacing China in the U.S. market, the evidence suggests that U.S. dependence on China may still be a concern. The data indicates that for electronics, which played a significant role in the decoupling process and contains many strategic products, countries that boosted their exports to the U.S. also increased their imports from China in the same sector. This strong correlation suggests that maintaining connections with China is crucial for those taking China's place in the U.S. market. In other words, to compete with China in exports,
countries have become more intertwined with China in industry-wide supply chains.
It is true that the increase in goods imported from China to the US was much slower than the growth in imports from other countries. This was especially noticeable in products subject to US tariffs. However, there isn't clear proof showing that companies are moving their production back to the US or finding other sources for their imports. Interestingly, supply chains, particularly those connected to important products, are still closely connected to China.
Countries that have taken China's place in the US market have become even more reliant on imports from China.
This situation resembles the incident where India sold inexpensive Russian crude oil to Europe. When the European Union, in alignment with the United States, imposed a ban on importing petroleum from Russia due to the Ukraine invasion, India emerged as a significant beneficiary. India became Russia's primary buyer of heavily discounted crude oil that the EU was mostly unable to procure. India refined this crude oil and then reintroduced it to the European market.
A similar scenario occurred when the US imposed tariffs on Chinese imports.
While US imports of tariffed goods from China decreased, other countries like Vietnam and South Korea stepped in to fill the gap in imports from China.
Interestingly, this shift also led to an increase in trade between these countries and China.
In simpler terms, the US chose to reduce its purchases from China and turn to Vietnam. However, Vietnam, in turn, increased its imports of raw products from China, processed them, and then sold the refined products back to the United States. The US effort to decouple and de-risk from China will not work. The reason is quite simple: the US and Chinese economies are highly intertwined. When the pandemic struck in 2020, shortages of critical medical supplies, like N95 masks, underlined how much the United States relied on China for its production. The Trump administration's tough stance on China had widespread support, even though there were potential downsides. In reality, most business leaders are not keen on cutting ties, and the reasons are quite clear. As one executive put it, they've spent 13 years building their presence in China, so abruptly ending that isn't feasible. This sentiment is shared widely because no business wants to see the time, effort, and money they've invested in establishing themselves in China go to waste.
Moreover, China is one of the US primary trading partners, and any disruption in this partnership could have serious repercussions for the US economy.
Trade is not just about numbers, it's about creating jobs, fostering prosperity, and improving the lives of citizens.
Disrupting this trade relationship would hurt businesses, workers, consumers, and societies.
Furthermore, decoupling, or as US officials call it, de-risking, might lead to higher tariffs and tighter investment restrictions, making it harder for US businesses to access foreign markets and cooperate internationally. Imposing tariffs can trigger trade conflicts that harm all parties involved.
For Europe, decoupling with China could get even worse. With its economies reliant on exports, could find itself caught up in these disputes, putting its economic stability at risk. The European Union's automotive industry, a major player in the region's economy, might experience the negative impact of decoupling as well. Anticipated sales of cars made in China within Europe, estimated to reach 1.5 million vehicles by 2030, equivalent to 13.5% of the EU's 2022 production, could face obstacles due to de-risking measures. This could lead to missed opportunities for the European auto sector and could impede its global competitiveness. In conclusion, while the concept of decoupling and de-risking from China might appear attractive at first glance, it comes with significant risks and drawbacks for both the US and the EU. Completely rearranging global supply chains is not only a time-consuming endeavor, but it also entails substantial costs and typically requires substantial and extended government involvement. Furthermore, attempting to decouple directly in trade relations may inadvertently strengthen the indirect connections between the US and China through the industrial supply chains of their trade partners. What are your thoughts on the content presented in this video?
Please share your opinions by leaving a comment. If you found the video informative and engaging, Don't forget to give it a thumbs up to show your support. To stay updated with more fascinating videos about events in Asia, be sure to subscribe to our channel.